Nicholson is in Bronllys near Brecon, home of the last local hero.
You can exchange messages, you can add things to other people's messages, and then you can print that out and send it to somebody that you want to influence. And I found that this was the most exciting thing that ever happened to me. I thought once I got hold of that idea, I thought I want to know more about this.
I've come to the shadow of the Brecon beacons, where the village of Bronllys comfortably nestles, to meet our local hero. She's a woman who loves her locality, treasures its past, lives its present fully, and more remarkably, uses the most advanced technology, the computer, to enhance its future. The past lies in this churchyard, the resting place of our ancestors, her great-grandparents, her grandparents, her father, and very recently her mother, who is buried alongside him. For Elyned Hearn, it was a critical time in her life. Now, as the head of the family, it is her responsibility to act as a link between the generations. This building, standing just outside Bronllys, has been the home of Elyned's family for over 100 years. Built by her grandfather as a malt house, it was taken over and worked by her father and turned into a cafe by her mother. Here it was that Elyned Hearn was born 63 years ago.
I suppose, I feel a privileged upbringing in this place. I think it was a wonderful play box when I was a child. You know, it was a wonderful place to play in, and it was so so many imaginative things could happen around it. It really, I felt it. School didn't really matter. There was so much going on at home. I didn't really need to, you know, do so much at really worrying about these other things. There was always such a lot happening around me.
When you were a child, your father was working the malt.
That's right. He was a maltster. He was working in the malt house.
Yeah. And so were you allowed in there? Did you?
Oh yes, we were part of the process. And as we grew up, we were probably quite a good help to him, actually. You know, we pumped the water, for instance. The pumps were in use all the time for water. And that was a very heavy work. And winding up things, you know, in boxes from one floor to the other. These boxes were continually going up and down, and so we would have great fun by listening to this. We would rush up to the top floor and jump in the box and come down while my father pulled the other one up. He didn't mind because the weight factor was much more equal.
Despite the happy times, the malting business sadly went into decline during the 30s, in times very similar to these. And it was then that Elyned's mother stepped in to make ends meet.
She was beginning to feel, you see, in the 30s, this recession was very bad, and there was just no money, and the farmers weren't paying their bills. For drying corn, there was very little to be done. And so she just had this idea to open this room, in fact, which we're sitting in as the first cafe. And of course, in those days, the banks wouldn't give you money. They wouldn't. As a woman, you were really, you really had it. But what you could do was, if you had just a few shillings, you could go to a sale and you could pick up tables and chairs for just a few shillings. So literally, that's what she did. She went and persuaded someone to fetch them home, and they'd set them up. And of course, she had a few things of her own. And she started by cooking on the open fire. I remember my father saying, well, they can't have shoes because, you know, there's no money for it.
You couldn't have shoes?
I couldn't have shoes because there wasn't going to be any money for it.
And your mother?
And my mother then opened a cafe. That was directly, you know, due to that fact. That was the one thing that I remember, you know, hearing that. And it was quite, I suppose, to a child, you know, you don't really worry so much about it, I suppose, in general. But overall, I think, when you're looking back, you know that that was a bad time.
Just on that evidence, her mother was clearly a woman who could rise above her times. And that same kind of initiative, which her daughter shows, makes Eluned a natural choice for this programme. For she has become something of a visionary in the world of computer communication. In her own front room, she set up a village-to-village, person-to-person information network called Honeytree. Tap into it and you gain access to data that Eluned has built up over the years on all manner of subjects. Tap a little harder and the window opens to a state-funded scheme called Telecottages Wales, for which Eluned is a vigorous campaigner. Roger Williams, a nearby farmer inspired by Eluned, has been trying to persuade the authorities to fund an unofficial Bronllys telecottage.
Hello, Eluned.
Oh, hello, Roger. What's brought you in here?
Well, we'll know tonight whether we're successful with the urban programme from the Welsh office.
Gosh, that's good news.
And if it goes ahead, we can start the cottage
Really?
project, yes.
Oh, that's tremendous. Another one going
Yes.
up. Yes, number 22.
Well, I didn't know we were that number. It'll be very important for this area, though.
It
won't
will, yes. Yeah.
Roger would be keen to use this new centre to combat local unemployment. It would be similar to the one at nearby Crickhowell Community School, also inspired by Eluned. Out of school hours, the pupils' computer room becomes a training and information centre for the public, and even lends a hand in the design of the parish magazine.
So we've got the main bulk of the work done. I just wondered if we can have a look at the front cover, though. How do I get onto the covers?
Okay, we'll just if we just use the mouse and the buttons on the display here, and we'll get back to the first page.
Jo Glynn, a computer teacher who helps run this project, remembers how she fell under Eluned's spell.
When I started at the school, I was introduced to her by the headmaster almost straight away. He said, you know, you must come out to Bronllys and meet this amazing woman. And she's got a cellar which is full of computer equipment. And I was very enthusiastic, and we went out there and were introduced. And so we thought that if we could set up a community office which was open after school hours, then members of the public could come in and use the computers with help from somebody whose job it was just to be here and make it easy for them to access information. And we thought it was particularly important really for people in a rural community, because they get cut off very easily and there aren't any big libraries around here where you could go and look things up. And so using the computers in this way would be very beneficial to them.
Well, I think everybody living locally knows Eluned, either through her or family. And Eluned, when she first had the idea about telecottages, contacted me. But like a lot of people, I found it very difficult to visualise what this new idea was going to mean for the community and mean for the people who lived in this area.
There's been huge changes since my, childhood. The whole village itself has become a different kind of place. The traffic coming through is horrendous. It prevents us talking to each other in the village, so if you meet someone you can't really have a conversation. The double yellow lines go right round it, so you can't park. You can't go to the church and park, you can't go to the hotel and park, or you can't go to the shop and park, or the village hall. The parking problem is appalling. There's nowhere to park. It's a different place, a different pace. Everything is at a different pace. It's ruined it in a sense of a place to live. I mean, when I went to school, I would be passing a group of cows, perhaps coming back to the field or going up mostly. But now you never see any animals on because it's just plain dangerous to take animals out. And I'm sure the farmers do it at times when, they have to choose.
Middle of the night.
Probably. So this is, it's a huge difference in the whole pace of our life, in this village.
But you can't go back, you see, can
No,
you? So
you
you've got to
can't.
go forward.
That's right.
And your computers, you think, as a way forward in order to get back a heart of a village, by the sound of it, then.
Well, I
if
think
that's not putting it too...
I think it could create a new hearth, in a sense, because in a sense, in the old and ancient days, I suppose, the hearth was where everything happened. Everybody learned their skills. Their weaving and whatever was done around the hearth. The firelight The only candlelight and whatever would be around the hearth. So
And your mother
everyone
cooks all-
gathered. They were cooking, they were doing everything. And then they had the extended families would probably all drop in. You'd have this hearth, which was very important. I believe in Welsh culture, the hearth is considered a sacred place. So we actually, I think, lost that sense of the hearth in our society. We all now got a little hearth, as it were, with the television dominating it mostly. And, you know, Jen's just the parent, or one parent very often family, scattered from one end of the country to the other, usually, with no grandparents, no aunts. No, I mean, even in this village, I know of people who have no relations to help them when they have children. And I find that very sad, because I think, you know, that's a time when you're going through these crises of birth and death and so on, you need to have your family to share these things, to be with, you know, and to, as a continuing way. And it would be far sort of healthier in some ways if we could get back some of that into our society, into our communities. And now we're wanting care in the community, you know, I don't know how else we're going to get it, really, without using these tools to help us, basically.
It is extraordinary, isn't it, that the hearth is almost one of the most old-fashioned sounding words. And
it is, yes.
Computer is the most modern sounding word.
Is,
and
yeah.
you're suggesting it's the new hearth.
The two things can exist.
Elynard's own conversion to computers was a direct result of her involvement in the peace movement of the 1980s. She realized making contact with like-minded people as far apart as Russia and South America was incredibly easy through this strange new technology. As she familiarized herself with it, she began to realize its potential closer to home. In Elynard's back garden stands a gnarled and ancient apple tree, which bears a delicious and rather rare apple. It caught the eye of local biologist Sheila Leach.
It is an old Hereford apple called the Crimson Coining. And the Coinings were a very early variety of apple, usually with ridges and knobs around the, what you call the eye.
Now, how does that link in to her computer?
Well, we visited Elynard's orchard 2 or 3 times now. I say for about the last 3 years we've been looking at local orchards. And this summer she said she'd started this honey tree system, and would it be a good idea to put apple information in onto it? And this seemed a good idea. We've got information come in from about 40 different private gardens and old orchards that we've looked at over the years. I hope it will serve as an exchange system of information. If somebody wants to try and replace an old apple or get one they remembered from their childhood, we will be able to say, yes, we know of somebody with a tree in a particular orchard, and you can have grafting material.
So Elynard's vision is giving another lease of life to the family home. Malthouse, cafe, museum, gallery, post office, now a centre for exchanging information.
The computer world, you see, is going to be part, I suppose it will grow, along with whatever goes on in the next stage of things. There's a kind of changeover going on now, a kind of a gateway to a new sort of way of doing things. We can go along and look at this property and say, how do we make money out of it? This is exactly what is happening out in the big wide world. We can look at it and say, what can this place do to help the community, help people understand more about the needs of the thing, this earth we live on? What can they do to help it survive and themselves survive?
Elynard's sense of survival is perhaps more keenly honed than some. Less than a mile away from her home is the old Talgarth Sanatorium, and in the corner of the village churchyard, lines of crosses mark the graves of the TB sufferers who never recovered. When she was a child, some of the patients, as they got better, ate and even stayed at her mother's cafe. Elynard eventually went to work as a nurse at this hospital in the late 40s, a formative experience in her life.
I found it a very sort of healthy hospital in some ways. It was a lot of open air work, because you were constantly in the open air, and the chalets were open to fresh air. To defeat the tuberculosis bug, you had to treat it with plenty of fresh air, graded exercise and lots of good food. And so, you know, the end result of that was a lot of them did recover, but some, of course, didn't, sadly.
In contrast to her easy acceptance of modern technology, Elynid doubts some of the new advances in medicine. So, Elynid, when you were a sister in this hospital, this was what?
Well, this was the vegetable gardens, you know? And they had greenhouses up there. And, of course, a lot of the vegetables were used in the hospital for the meals for patients and so on. And also, of course, it was used as part of the graded exercise program. And the patients would actually work in the gardens as part of their exercise to get them better. And I feel it was quite a holistic kind of program, really, because you had the whole thing, the whole body was looked after.
But you're not saying, are you, that, I mean, you got then disenchanted by nursing because of the use of drugs? Because, I mean, obviously, it's also eliminated TB, didn't it?
Oh, of course, yes. The drugs came in and they were sort of magic, really, because they did so many wonderful things. But after a while, you know, there was the sense of the kind of machinery taking over from the nurse and the care of the patient became kind of secondary in that sense. It becomes too much of the machine, you know, so many now machines and so many drugs used, so that I felt myself, you know, that this wasn't a place for me, you know, because although I'm interested in this computer technology, it is really about something to do with communications, it's not, and about people that I'm interested in.
And you felt your nursing was going further away
from that, you know, and it seemed at that time, certainly there was a spell. I think now some understanding is coming back about the importance of the one-to-one contact the nurse has to have with the patient.
Let us peel off another layer from our local hero, Elynid Hearn. On the banks of the River Wye at nearby Glaisbury is a scout hut, which was a regular base for Elynid and her husband, as they were both very involved in the scout movement for many years. Tragically, he died in 1978, and this memorial was built in gratitude to a much-loved man.
Hello, Cub Scouts. Hello. That's it, that's a good one. Now, I heard you singing your song about the Glaisbury Scouts, and I want to hear it again, because you do it so well, okay? Right? Now, who's starting off? You starting off? Okay. Right?
Wherever we go, people always ask us.
The program is a very good program for teaching children to become reliant on themselves and to take responsibility, to not have everything done for them all the time, and to go out and meet other people, and also to belong to a world brotherhood of scouting, which is now something like 18 million strong. And this allows a child great opportunities for education in many fields, you know, outdoor activities, all the creative things. And in fact, when I was doing the Duke of Edinburgh Award for the guides of Breconshire, I was trying to build something which, in fact, when I came to the computer world, I discovered was an ideal place to put it, as it were. Because in the award program and also in the Scout and Guide program, you have a great need of people with skills to teach these young people one-to-one. So you really need a database full of names and addresses of people who are willing to teach these young people. And so whether it's beekeeping or whether it's making scones or whether it's, you know, whatever. Very good. That's great.
The unexpected death at a young age of her husband was a terrible blow to Elynid. This stretch of the river, close to the scout hut where she walks regularly, has both painful memories and healing powers.
I suppose about 6 months after it happened, especially around about the time my birthday, my husband's birthday, when it was a special kind of week, you know, and in the spring when everything's coming up and it's a lovely time. I suppose that's when you really feel things, really more than at any other time. So I suppose it'd be about 6 months I woke up, as I did sometimes. You know, you wake up when you're bereaved, you wake up weeping. You know, you just have this very early morning, and the Chinese understand this because they have it in their health cycles, and you know, they've got a clock when they say 4 o'clock in the morning, between 4 and 7 a.m. is the white period, the bereavement period.
Low, it's very low.
It's very low, and of course this comes to you, and you just wake up just crying, because this thing is coming through in the morning. I remember one morning, which was probably the worst one, when I really wanted to shriek loudly, and of course you can't in your house, you know, you could upset people. So I got up about 6 o'clock in the morning, and I went down the fields to the riverside, and I was walking along feeling I wanted to throw myself in, basically. You know, it's that sort of feeling. You're at the lowest ebb. You just wanted to finish whatever this was. It was just too painful. You don't want to know any more about it. And I was walking along, and you know, just like this is now, and a little duck. I was amazed because this little duck came out of the riverbank, and it was obviously the mother duck with about 10 little ones, and she was splashing like mad. She could feel me coming, and she was creating this kind of great volume of spray, which was hiding all the little ones, you know. And she went off down the river, in the middle of the river, and I suddenly felt this sort of wonderful energy of this mother duck, you know, protecting the little ones, and it sort of turned everything, this depression that I was in, and it sort of lifted me up, and it somehow brought me back to where I was in life, and there's something better, you know, than this grieving, this awful depression.
But then do you think that you have wanted to kind of serve causes, serve community, in a sense, right? Because of some wish to forget your own hurt? I don't know. I mean, is that too fanciful?
I'm sure. No, not at all, because I've met other people, you know, in guiding, for instance, who have lost their partners, and they continue in guiding, and they find that guiding gives them the companionship and the sort of work that's important, you know, to do for the children. So it does heal you a bit, but at the same time, you go on doing it too long and you get too involved in it. It actually stretches you too far, and then you're not looking after yourself enough. Right. And this self that you need to build, to strengthen, to be able to go out and do these things, is something that I lost track of a bit, you know.
Well, don't you think that when things are hard, times are hard, you cuddle up for comfort? You have to go back to some quite primitive feelings about your neighbours and about each other.
I think it's all about survival in the end, you see. You know, you've got to get together to survive as a species, you know. If we don't get together as a species, we are not going to be here, you know. This planet will survive without us, and it will probably exterminate us if we get in the way. I have this feeling, you know, we really got to get to grips with this, otherwise, you know, problems are going to happen, you know, continue to happen rather increasingly, until we make big decisions about our life and our life in general, how we live it, and what we actually do on a daily basis that is harmful to this planet we live on, and usually harmful to ourselves. I feel very protective of Wales and all things Welsh. I think that's a part of the roots thing, and going back in time and being part of something that's special, you know. And as Wales is possibly the first place, I believe, in one of the books that we got. It's very ancient, and it has a very long, it goes back in time so far that it really gives you this sense of being part of the mountains and the rocks and everything, which I think is important. And I think my mother lost track of it in her emotional life, because she had to attend school at a time when the inspectors came round saying that all Welsh children in schools speaking Welsh should actually speak English when they went to school. They were not to speak in Welsh. And they inflicted something upon them which is called the Welsh Not. And this was a card which was placed around their necks, when they started school, quite young, if they spoke a word in Welsh, this card was put on their necks. And during the day, it would be passed from one to the other. And as each child spoke in Welsh, it would be passed around. And then at the end of the day, the child with the card would be beaten. It was one of those really very sad things which must have affected the Welsh speaking of many people, who then, as my mother did, thought it was painful and was better not taught to her children, so she didn't speak in Welsh to me or tried to teach me the Welsh. So when I came home with homework, you know, she was not really very interested to help me with this Welsh.
It's quite a scarring thing to have done, isn't it?
It's very scarring, and I feel that it went right through to her last few years when she had a stroke. And in fact, the one time when I spoke to her in Welsh was after the stroke. What remained of her speech came through in Welsh and not English. And so she sort of asked me, beth yw'r gloch yw I? And I said, deg yw'r gloch. And it was the first exchange that we've ever had in Welsh. As I said, I realised she couldn't speak in English after this stroke, but something was coming through in Welsh. And although very little was there in English or Welsh in the last few years, after the stroke, I was very interested in this surfacing of Welsh.
A memorial service for Eluned's mother was held not in the church, but in the Honey Cafe, the old hearth, as Eluned has called it, where family and friends gathered from all over. And a message went out to those who couldn't attend through the Honey Tree computer, the new hearth.
You're talking about my family going back in the generations and how we've lived in this valley. So one has a sense, such as the Native Americans have, of working to the 7th generation and stewarding, you know, or looking after things to that generation, not just your own generation. So when you're looking at things like that, you don't always value the things that people normally would, in the sense of going to work, earning money, coming back and going out and enjoying themselves. You have to think, and as I think I must have been born with this sort of in me in some ways, perhaps something that I was given, to see this the wholeness of things, the interconnectedness of things, the things that everything that you do affects somebody somewhere. It's what they call now the butterfly effect, I believe, in physics. That whatever we think, whatever we do, is increasingly important to our own survival.